Some people are ice on the outside and a house on fire within. He spent his whole life perfecting silence. Then one wrong spell handed her the key to every word he never said, and she couldn't give it back. We begin. The castle had not finished healing, and it made no secret of it. Where the north corridor met the charms landing, a length of wall was still missing, and someone had stretched canvas over the gap and pinned it with iron nails. When the wind came off the lake, the canvas breathed in and out like something sleeping badly. Hermione Granger had walked past it 400 times since September and had never once stopped noticing it. She noticed everything now. That was the trouble with the year. The war had left her with a nervous system tuned too fine, so that a dropped book made her wand hand twitch, and the smell of burnt sugar from the kitchens could stop her dead on a staircase for reasons she could not name. Tonight, the classroom smelled of chalk dust and cold ash, and the particular sourness of old parchment, that faint mineral tooth that got into the back of the throat. Candles had burned down to knuckles of wax. The 7th window was cracked and had been for 3 months, and through the crack came a thin whistle of November. Across the table from her, Draco Malfoy was reading and had not turned a page in 11 minutes. She knew because she had counted. "You're not reading," she said. He turned a page. "Now you are pretending to read." "I am pretending you are not speaking," he said, without looking up. "It requires concentration. Do keep interrupting." There it was, that voice of his, flat, unhurried, sanded smooth. He had come back to school in September with it, and had not once let it slip. Whatever had happened to him in the months after the trials had taken the sneer out and left something worse in its place, something perfectly level, like a frozen pond that gives no clue how deep the water runs beneath. Hermione flattened both palms on the table. "We have 9 days," she said. "The project requires a demonstrable result, not a theoretical framework, not your beautiful handwriting, a result. I am aware of the deadline. You are aware of it the way one is aware of weather." His eyes came up then, grey and steady, and giving her absolutely nothing. She had grown to hate that steadiness in a way that felt disproportionate and slightly humiliating. She had known him as a boy who could not keep a single feeling off his face. Now he had a face like a closed drawer, and she found herself provoking him for no reason except to see whether the drawer would open. It never did. "Granger." He set the book down. The silver ring on his right hand clicked once against the tabletop. "You have written 40 pages on the arithmetic architecture of shared cognition. It is, and I say this with as little pleasure as possible, good work. You have also refused to cast anything for 3 weeks. So which of us, exactly, is treating this like weather?" Her jaw set. He was right, and that was intolerable. The assignment had come down from Flitwick in October, phrased so mildly that it took her a full day to understand what she was being asked to do. Cognitive resonance, a branch of charms that had been quietly abandoned in 1979 and had not been formally taught since. The theory was elegant. 2 minds, briefly harmonized, could hold a construct that neither could hold alone. 2 wand hands sharing a single intention. It had been used once for healing, for finding people buried under things. Nobody had touched it since the war, and everyone knew why. The war had taught the entire country what it meant to have another person inside your head. Legilimency, the imperious, whole villages full of people who could no longer trust the inside of their own skulls. And Flitwick, in his small, dry way, had assigned it to the two of them. To her and to the boy whose aunt had held her down on a drawing-room floor. She had never asked whether that was deliberate. She was fairly sure she did not want the answer. "Fine," she said. "Then let's cast it." Something moved through him. She caught it only because she had spent 2 months learning to read him at the level of millimeters. It was not fear. It was a stillness that came a half-second too late, as though he had reached for the composure rather than simply having it. "Now," he said. "Now. It's past 11. You're not tired. You're never tired." She was already standing, already pushing the desks back with the side of her hip, wood shrieking across stone. "You sit in that chair every night until the candles die. Don't pretend the hour is the problem." He stood. He did it slowly, unfolding to his full height, and she was aware, as she always inconveniently was, of exactly how much taller than her he had become. He had lost weight in the spring and never got it back. His collar sat loose at the throat. There was a fine tremor in his left hand, which he had learned to hide by keeping it in his pocket, and which she had learned to look for. "Positions," she said. They took them, 6 feet apart, wands raised, the space between them cleared of everything but a single candle burning on the flagstones. The incantation was a long one, 17 syllables, and it required both casters to speak it in unison, not merely at the same time, but with the same intention, which was the part the textbooks refused to define, and the part she had been dreading for 3 weeks. Because to share an intention with someone, you had to have one. And you had to mean it. "On 3, she said. "Granger." "What?" He was looking at the candle rather than at her. "If it goes wrong," he said, "step back and drop your wand. Don't try to hold it. Don't be brave about it. Just let it go." The wind pushed at the canvas out in the corridor, in and out. "Why would you say that?" "Because you never do." He raised his wand. 3. They spoke it together. The first 6 syllables felt like nothing at all, like reciting a shopping list. Then, somewhere around the 7th, the air between them acquired weight. Not visible, not even quite audible. It was the pressure change before a storm, the low ache behind the eyes, the sensation of standing under a bridge as something enormous passes over. The candle flame went from gold to a hard chemical white and stopped moving entirely, as though someone had painted it there. Hermione felt her own thoughts thin out and stretch, the way sound stretches under water. And then, faintly, through the pressure, through the stretched thin place, she felt him. Not words. Nothing so clear as words. Just a shape, a temperature, a quality of attention. It was like putting a hand against a wall and feeling that there is a room on the other side. The shape was afraid, not of the spell. She knew that immediately and without knowing how. It was afraid the way an animal is afraid of a door being opened, of being seen. Her concentration slipped by perhaps a hair's breadth. The syllables came apart. There was a crack and a smell of ozone and singed wool, and the white flame went out. The pressure vanished so abruptly that Hermione's ears popped. Her wand leapt in her hand like a fish, and she gripped it harder. "Don't be brave about it." and she absolutely did not let it go. And the discharge went up her arm to the elbow in a fast, bright line of pins and needles. She heard him say her name. Then she was on her knees on the flagstones with her palm flat against the cold and her hair in her face, and there was a hand on her shoulder blade that was not her own. "Let go of the wand," Draco said. "Granger, open your hand." She opened her hand. The wand rolled away and stopped against the leg of a desk. "I'm fine. You are on the floor. I'm fine on the floor." For a moment, neither of them moved. His hand was still on her back between her shoulder blades, and she could feel the fine tremor in it, and she thought, with a clarity that alarmed her, "He is warmer than I expected." Then the hand was gone, and he was standing, and the room was just a room again. Chalk dust, cold ash, a dead candle, 17 syllables, wasted. "Well," he said, from somewhere above her, "that was a spectacular failure." It was not spectacular. She got up, brushed her knees, tucked her hair back with a hand that was not quite steady. Spectacular would be something. That was nothing. Nothing happened. He looked at her for a moment too long. "No," he agreed. Nothing happened. They packed their books in silence. At the door, he stood back to let her pass, which he had started doing in October and which she had never mentioned, and the corridor swallowed the sound of their footsteps into that hollow echo that empty castles make at night. The canvas breathed. They parted at the landing without saying good night, because they never did. She washed her face. She got into bed. She lay in the dark, listening to the pipes tick as the heat went out of them. Nothing happened, she thought. 21 days of work, and the spell didn't take at all. And a voice that was not hers said, quite clearly, 241, 242. Hermione's eyes opened. The dormitory was dark. The hangings were drawn. Somewhere below, a door closed. Her heart began to beat in a way she did not like at all. 243, 244. If I get to 300, I'm allowed to think about something else. That was the rule. That has always been the rule. The voice was not loud. It was not even precisely a sound. It arrived somewhere behind her eyes, in the place where her own thoughts lived, and it wore its own weather, dry, quick, exhausted, and unmistakably catastrophically familiar. 245. 200 and... No. Stop. Don't. Don't think about her hand on the floor. 246. Hermione sat up in the dark, both hands pressed flat over her mouth, and did not breathe for a very long time. She did not sleep. By 4 in the morning, she had catalogued the possibilities the way she catalogued everything, in a list, in the dark, with her knees drawn up under the blanket and her back against the cold stone of the wall. 1. A dream. Discounted at approximately midnight, when the voice began humming. 2. Exhaustion, auditory hallucination, the residue of a discharge to the nervous system. Plausible, except that hallucinations do not, as a rule, count ceiling stones and then complain about the arithmetic. 3. The spell worked. She kept coming back to 3, and every time she did, something in her chest folded over on itself, because it had not worked in the way it was supposed to. The construct required 2 anchors. It should have been reciprocal, a shared architecture, both minds equally open and equally closed. What she had instead was not architecture at all. It was a broken window, it only went one way. 298, said the voice, sometime around 3. 299. 300. A pause. She had learned already that his pauses had textures. Right. Congratulations. You may now think about literally anything at all. Another pause. Anything. Any single thing in the entire world. She has a freckle just under her left eye, and I have known about it since the 4th of October. Start again. 1, 2, 3. Hermione put her face in her hands. Breakfast was worse than she had imagined, and she had spent 4 hours imagining it. The great hall in November was a cavern of grey light and scaffolding. The east end was still bandaged in poles and rope, where the ceiling enchantment had been torn, and the false sky there refused to knit, so that half the hall showed cloud, and half showed nothing but bare, honest stone. The tables had been repaired, but not matched, and there were 3 separate shades of oak running the length of Gryffindor. Draco Malfoy came in at 8:20, alone, as he always did. He walked the length of the hall with his chin level and his hands loose, and his face composed into that flat, unreadable calm. And Hermione watched perhaps 200 people not look at him, which was its own kind of violence, and she heard, in her own skull, with perfect clarity, 31 steps to the end of the table. Don't count them out loud. Nobody can hear you, but you count them out loud is the sort of thing that gets a person a bed in a very quiet ward. Weasley is staring. Fine. Let him stare. He has the facial expression of a man doing long division. Sit. Sit like a person who has slept. Pour something. Pouring is normal. People pour. He poured tea. His hands were perfectly steady. Hermione, from 4 tables away, watched them be steady and heard the low, continuous static underneath, a hum of dread with no object, running like water under ice. Don't look left. She's at the left. That is precisely why we don't look left. Her toast turned to sawdust in her mouth. You look terrible, Ginny said, dropping into the seat beside her. Did you sleep? Not much. The project. Something like that. Oh, splendid. Weasley's sister is here as well. That's the whole set. Shall we invite the portrait of Dumbledore? Make a party of it? Stop. Just stop it. Nobody is thinking about you. Nobody has thought about you since the trial. You are furniture. Be furniture. Hermione set down her toast very carefully. She had spent 7 years believing she knew exactly what was inside Draco Malfoy's head. And what she had believed was in, there was a kind of cold contempt, distilled and refined by generations, running steady and pure. What was actually in there was a boy talking to himself without stopping, at speed, in the tone of a man trying to keep another man calm during a fire. Hermione! Ginny was frowning. You've gone a very odd colour. Have I? You have. Don't look up. Do not look up. There is nothing at the Gryffindor table that concerns you. Looked up. Well done. Superb. A triumph of discipline. Hermione's fork slipped out of her fingers and rang against the plate. Across the hall, unmistakably, Draco Malfoy's eyes came up at the sound, found her, and dropped again. The entire transaction lasting perhaps half a second, the coldest and briefest thing imaginable from the outside. Inside, she heard a sound like a held breath being let go through the teeth. Fine, fine. Everyone drops cutlery. It's a common human event. Now stop thinking about her hands. She stood up so quickly the bench scraped. I've got to go and... the library. Books. There are books. Are those the same books that were there yesterday? They multiply, said Hermione, and fled. Potions was a disaster of a different kind. Slughorn had them brewing in pairs, and by the arithmetic of a diminished 8th year class, the pairs had been fixed since September, and Hermione's pair was Draco. She had been grateful for it once, in the abstract, in the way one is grateful for a competent surgeon. He was good. He was better than good. His hands knew things his mouth would never bother to explain, and he could tell by smell alone when a base was 3 degrees too hot. She stood beside him at the bench with a cauldron between them and heard everything. Too much heat. She's letting it go too hot. He reached past her and turned the flame down a quarter turn without a word. I had it, she said. You had it going to a rolling boil. It's supposed to boil. It's supposed to simmer, and then it boils when you add the sneezewort. And if it's already boiling when you add the sneezewort, then you and I both get to spend the afternoon in the hospital wing explaining our eyebrows to Madame Pomfrey. He didn't look at her. He was slicing something with a small silver knife, thin, even, mechanical. You know this. You wrote it out for me in September on a piece of card. I still have the card. Why did you say that? Why, in the name of Merlin, did you say that? She'll think you kept it. You did keep it. She'll think you kept it deliberately. You did keep it deliberately. You kept it in the front of your potions text, and you have looked at it more times than is defensible for a man reading a list of brewing temperatures. Be quiet. Hermione gripped the edge of the workbench. There was a burn scar on the wood under her thumb, a little crater from someone's spilled acid, and she pressed her thumbnail into it and concentrated on the sensation, and tried, with everything she had, to be a person standing normally at a bench. You kept the card, she said. His knife did not falter. I keep everything. It's a character flaw. 9 words. Get to 9 words and stop. She doesn't need your inventory. What else do you keep? The knife stopped. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. Properly, the full weight of it, grey and level and utterly opaque. And Hermione felt the enormous unfairness of it, because his face said nothing. His face said, what a tedious question, and simultaneously, in the space behind her eyes, she heard something come apart like a dropped stack of plates. The card, the blue scarf you left in the library on the 12th, not left. You left it. I took it. I took it, and I have it. And there is no version of this where that isn't the act of a lunatic. Every scrap of parchment you've ever passed me with corrections on it, in that impossible handwriting, I have all of them. They are in the bottom of my trunk, in an order that means something, and I could not tell you what it means, and if anyone found them, I would walk into the lake. Parchment, he said aloud. Mostly. Sentiment for stationery. It's Malfoy in the blood. And he went back to slicing. Hermione stared at the side of his face. She had a horrible, vertiginous sensation, like the floor of the room had been swapped for glass, and she could see how far down it went. He was standing 8 inches from her, perfectly calm, saying nothing that mattered, and underneath, he was somebody drowning very quietly and hoping nobody noticed the water. She's still looking at me. Don't turn. Don't turn round. If you turn round, she'll see it. She's the cleverest person in this castle, and she has been reading you since you were 11 years old. and if you turn round now, she will see the whole thing laid out like a hand of cards. Count something. Anything. The jars on the shelf. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her sleeves damp at the wrist. She's been at the sink. Her hands will be cold. 5, 6. Give her your gloves. No, absolutely not. Under no circumstances. That is the single most transparent act a person could commit, and you would rather die. 7. Hermione's chest hurt. She had been prepared, in a distant academic way, for the possibility of hearing him plot something, of hearing bitterness, or the old cruelty, or the flat, mean little assessments he used to hand out in corridors. She had braced against that. She had not braced against this. Nobody, she thought, is supposed to be this loud on the inside and this silent on the outside. Nobody could survive it. It was like watching a man hold his hand in a flame and discuss the weather. Malfoy. Are you... She stopped. Are you all right? Was not a question that existed between them. It had no grammar. It would land in the space between their cauldrons like a live grenade. Are you adding the sneezewort, or shall I? Something in his shoulders let go by a fraction of an inch. I'll do it, he said. You'll be too quick and too generous. You always are. She always is. That's the whole trouble with her. She is too quick and too generous, and she does it for people who have never done a single thing to deserve it. And one day, someone is going to take that and use it, and it will not be me, because I already did, years ago, and I have been paying for it in installments ever since. Sneezewort, 2 ounces. Concentrate. He added the sneezewort. The potion turned the colour of a bruise going yellow, exactly as it should, and Slughorn came past and made a delighted noise and said something about the pair of them being a formidable combination, and Draco said, "Thank you, sir," in a voice like a closed shutter, and Hermione said nothing at all because her throat had stopped working. By evening she had a plan, and the plan was, tell him. She rehearsed it on the stairs. There's been a consequence from the casting. It's affecting me, not you. I can hear you. Clean, factual, 4 sentences. He would be angry. He would be humiliated, which would be worse than angry. But it was his mind, and she had it in her pocket like a stolen letter, and every hour she kept it, she liked herself slightly less. She found him in the charms corridor at 9:30, alone, sitting on the wide stone sill of the broken window with one knee drawn up, looking out at nothing. The canvas over the ruined wall was breathing in the wind. Rain had started, fine and cold, and it came through the gap in threads and left a dark tide mark on the flagstones. He did not turn round. "You walk like a herd of hippogriffs," he said. "You always have. Astonishing in a woman of your size." "Malfoy. Granger." She stood in the middle of the corridor with the rain smell in her nose. Wet stone, cold iron, the faint, scorched ghost of ozone that had never quite left this part of the castle. And she opened her mouth to say it. "Please don't go." She froze. Say something so she doesn't go. Anything. Insult her. She likes that. She'll stay and argue for 20 minutes if you insult her properly. 20 minutes. You are begging for 20 minutes of an argument. Look at yourself. Look at what you have been reduced to. Say something. "You'll catch your death sitting there," Draco said out loud in the flattest voice she had ever heard. "And then I'll have to write the entire project alone. And frankly, Your handwriting is the only thing making it legible." Hermione stood very still. The rain came through the wall in threads, and the canvas breathed, and somewhere far below a door closed, and she understood, with a completeness that frightened her, that she was not going to tell him tonight. Not because she was afraid of his anger, because she had heard him ask her to stay, and he had not said it, and she was not yet strong enough to give up being the only person in the world who knew. "Move up," she said, and sat down on the sill beside him. The sill was wide enough for two people who did not touch, and narrow enough that not touching required attention. Hermione sat with her back against one side of the embrasure and her boots against the other, and Draco sat where he had been sitting, and between them there was perhaps 10 inches of cold stone and a draught coming through the broken glass. Rain moved across the grounds in slow, pale sheets. The lake had gone the colour of pewter. Somewhere out past the greenhouses, a light was burning in Hagrid's window, a small, stubborn orange dot in all that grey. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Inside her skull, it was not quiet at all. She sat down. She actually sat down. Do not react. Do not turn your head. Look at the lake. The lake is fascinating. The lake has been fascinating for 1,000 years. 10 inches. That's, what, a hand and a half. Less. That is nothing at all. Say something normal. "You're wet," he said. "It's raining." Yes, that would be the mechanism. He shrugged out of his coat. He did it the way he did everything now, without any visible decision behind it, and he did not offer it to her, because offering would have required looking at her. He simply dropped it across the space between them so that it landed over her knees, and then went back to studying the pewter lake as though the matter had never involved him. There. That's not an offering. That's a discarding. Anyone would have done that. It's practically hostile. Hermione looked down at the coat over her knees. It was heavy, and the lining was warm from him, and it smelled of cedar and cold air and something underneath that was just skin. "Thank you," she said. Don't thank you. Don't make it a thing." His voice had not moved at all. "You were dripping into my peripheral vision. It was distracting. Don't make it a thing. Please don't make it a thing. If she makes it a thing, you'll have to be clever about it, and you have exactly no cleverness left. You spent it all in potions. You have been running on fumes since September, and one kind word from her would take the whole structure down." Hermione pulled the coat a little higher over her knees and found that her hands were not entirely steady, and dealt with this by folding the cuff over precisely twice and then again until the fold was exactly even. This became the shape of the days. She had expected the invasion to be unbearable, and it was, but not in the way she had prepared for. She had braced against horror. What arrived instead was intimacy, uninvited and total, and it wore her down the way water wears down stone, not by force, but by refusing to stop. There were the songs. That was the thing nobody would ever have guessed, the thing she could not have invented if she had tried. Draco Malfoy's mind at rest played music, not the sort she would have assigned him. On the Tuesday of the second week, it was a jingle from the wireless, some idiot advertisement for a hair tonic, 4 bars of it looping with the relentless mechanical cheer of a music box. Sleek easies, for the man who... No. Sleek easies, for the man who... I will walk into the lake. I mean it. I will walk directly into the lake with stones in my pockets. It went on for 3 days. On the third day, in the middle of Transfiguration, while McGonagall was explaining the ethical limitations of self-transfiguration, and Draco sat in the second row with the still, faintly bored expression of a boy carved from soap, Hermione heard the jingle arrive for what must have been the 400th time, and had to press her knuckle against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Sleek easies, for the man who, if any part of me survives this year, it will not be the part that had taste. She laughed. She could not help it. It came out as a strangled cough, and half the class turned round, and McGonagall paused with her chalk in the air. Something amusing, Miss Granger. Frog in my throat, Professor. She laughed at something. What did she laugh at? Nothing happened. Nobody said anything funny. There is nothing funny in this room. There hasn't been anything funny in this castle since 1997. She has a dimple on the left side only. Only the left. That is a structural asymmetry, and I think about it more than I think about my own future. Sleek easies. Hermione put her forehead down on her folded arms and pretended to have a headache for 11 minutes. Then there were the other things. He did not sleep. She had suspected it. Now she knew it with the awful precision of a witness. He went to bed around midnight and lay there, and his mind ran, and it ran. And by 2 a.m, it had wandered somewhere she could not follow it and did not want to. The door. There's a door in the drawing room, and it opens outward, not inward. And I have thought about that fact 10,000 times, because it means she could not have got out, even if... Don't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Her voice went. That's the thing nobody talks about. It went, at the end, it stopped being a voice. And I stood by the fireplace with my hands at my sides, and I did nothing. And there is no arrangement of the following 60 years that puts that right. 8, 9, 10. Hermione lay in her own bed, in her own dark 4 floors and a great deal of stone away, with tears sliding sideways into her hair, and heard him count. She had spent a year not thinking about that room. She had built a very good wall around it. And now, here it was, from the other side, and the other side was somehow worse, because from the other side there had been someone standing by the fireplace who could not move and could not speak, and had gone on being unable to move for 18 months afterwards, every single night, on a loop in a dormitory bed. 11, 12. If I could go back, I would not save myself. I want that on the record. I would not save myself. 13. She stopped hating him somewhere around the 14th of November. She did not decide to. It simply was not there one morning when she reached for it. And then, threaded through all of it, worse than the counting and worse than the songs, there was the litany. It had a rhythm. She learned it the way you learn the sound of a house settling. Monday, the covered walkway, wind coming off the lock, and her hair going everywhere. Don't look, don't look, don't look. Looked. Right. Well, that's the day gone. Wednesday, the library, and she pushed her sleeves up to the elbow because the fire was too hot. Forearms. Fine. That's fine. That's just anatomy. Everyone has them. Read your book. She has ink on the inside of her wrist. She always does. She holds her quill wrong, and she has held it wrong for 8 years, and nobody has ever told her, and I will die before I tell her. Because if I tell her, she'll fix it, and then it will be gone. Friday, the Great Hall, and she argued with Professor Vector about the propagation of a numerological error and did not back down for 9 straight minutes. Look at her. Look at her go. Vector's wrong. Vector's been wrong since the second line, and she knew it in about 4 seconds, and she's been dismantling him with such immaculate manners that he hasn't noticed he's losing. She does this thing where she gets angrier and more polite at the same time. There is no defense against it. There is no defense against her at all, and I have known that since I was 15 years old. And it is the single most inconvenient piece of self-knowledge I possess. Don't look. Looked. Always look. That's the actual problem. There has never once been a moment when I did not look. Hermione set her fork down and stared at the tablecloth. The fantasies were the thing that undid her. She had, in some shameful private corner, expected them to be crude. She had prepared herself for that, had rehearsed the flat clinical distaste she would feel, had almost looked forward to it, because it would have made him easy to file away again. They were not crude. They came at odd hours, mostly late, mostly when he was too tired to police himself, and they were so small and so domestic that they took the breath out of her. Sunday. There'd be a Sunday and it wouldn't be raining, and there'd be a table somewhere that isn't in a castle with too many books on it, and she'd be reading, and I'd be reading, and neither of us would say anything for an hour, and it would be fine. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the entire fantasy of a grown man. Or she says something, and I say something back, and she laughs. Not the polite one, the real one, the one she does with Potter and Weasley, where she puts her hand flat on the table. I want that once. Once would do. I would take once and live off it. Or, and this is the one that ought to have me committed, she is cold, and I put my hands over hers, and she lets me. She lets me. Go to sleep, you appalling creature. Hermione lay awake with her hand pressed over her sternum, where something had begun to ache in a manner she could not account for, and refused, for 11 consecutive nights, to name. On the 22nd they worked late in the empty charms room again, and the candles burned down to knuckles again, and she read the same paragraph 9 times without absorbing a word of it. He was across the table. He had rolled his sleeves back, which he almost never did, and she was careful to look only at his hands, and only briefly, because on his left forearm there was a shape under the skin like a burn healing badly, and she had learned in October that he could feel her looking at it from 4 feet away. She's not reading. She's been on that page since 10:30. Something's wrong with her. Something's been wrong with her for a fortnight. She's gone strange around me. She doesn't fight properly anymore. She looks at me like she's checking whether I'm still breathing. She knows. She can't know. Know what? There's nothing to know. Nothing has happened. Nothing will ever happen. You have arranged your entire existence around nothing happening. But she looks at me like she's sorry. I cannot bear that she looks at me like she's sorry. Hermione's quill stopped moving. Malfoy. Why did you come back? The candle guttered. He did not look up from his page. For the education. I hear it's excellent. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I've given 11 times to 11 people who asked, and it has held up admirably. I'm not 11 people. No, you're not. You're the only one who ever asks twice. He put his quill down. He aligned it with the edge of the parchment, and then he adjusted the alignment, and then he adjusted it again, and Hermione watched a boy who never fidgeted spend 4 full seconds arranging a quill. "Because there was nowhere else," he said. "The house is a mausoleum with my mother rattling around in it. Everywhere I go in Britain, there's a man behind a counter who remembers my face from a newspaper. Here, at least, the hatred is properly informed." He shrugged, one shoulder precise. "And because McGonagall wrote to me, in September, a letter. She didn't have to." "What did it say?" "That the offer of a place was not a reward, and I shouldn't mistake it for one." Something happened at the corner of his mouth that was not remotely a smile. "And that she expected me for the full year. And that she'd known my mother at 17, and she was sorry." 4 words at the bottom in that handwriting like wire. I have read them perhaps 600 times. I could not tell you why they matter. I only know that I got to the 4th word and had to sit down on the stairs. Hermione's eyes stung, hard and sudden, and she stood up so abruptly that her chair went over backwards with a crash like a felled tree. He looked up at last. "Granger, I have to." Her hands were doing something meaningless with her books, stacking them, unstacking them. "It's late. I've read this page 9 times. You've read it 19. I counted. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. Don't." "Good night," she said, and went, and did not stop going until she was 3 corridors away, with her back against a cold wall and both hands pressed flat over her face, listening to a voice 4 floors below say her name in a tone he would never, in 100 years, allow onto his face. The ministry came on the 29th of November. They came in a delegation of 9, in robes the colour of wet slate, and they came to observe, which was the word printed on the notice pinned to every board in the castle. Observation of the reintegration cohort, a phrase with a soft outer skin and something metal in the middle of it. Hermione read the notice twice at breakfast and understood exactly what it meant, and so did everyone else. And so, 4 tables away, did the boy who had gone slightly and unnoticeably still with a teapot in his hand. 9 of them. 9 is not observation. 9 is a hearing with better manners. Put the pot down. Put it down slowly. If it shakes, they'll write that down. Someone will absolutely write that down, and it will go in a file with my name on the front, and it will be read aloud in 11 years by a man I have never met. He put the teapot down. It did not shake. Hermione watched his hand and felt her own pulse in her throat. They were assembled in the great hall at 11, the whole returning 8th year, 31 of them, standing in a loose line before the staff table like a poorly organised regiment. The scaffolding at the east end had been draped for the occasion, which fooled no one. A young witch from the Department of Magical Education carried a self-inking quill that hovered at her shoulder and scratched continuously, and the sound of it, that small dry rasping, like a mouse in a wall, got into Hermione's back teeth. Draco stood 4 places to her left. He had done up his collar. His hands were at his sides, entirely loose. The head of the delegation was a broad grey man named Pello, with the manner of someone who had been very good at his job in a time when the job had been simpler. He talked for 6 minutes about healing and about the future and about the extraordinary generosity of the wizarding community, and every word of it was true, and every word of it was a lie. And Hermione stood in the third-rate light of a half-mended ceiling and heard, from 4 places to her left, extraordinary generosity. Yes, very good. Say it again. Don't move. Don't shift your weight. He's going to come down the line and he's going to stop because they always stop, and the entire point of 9 people in slate robes is the stopping. Face. Where's the face? Get the face on. Pello came down the line. He was pleasant to everyone. He shook Ernie Macmillan's hand and asked Susan Bones about her aunt, and made a small joke to Hermione that she did not hear a syllable of, because she was watching the man move sideways 1 place and 1 place more, and then stop. Mr. Malfoy. Sir. Sir. Good. Sir is correct. Sir is what furniture would say if furniture could talk. Your mother is well? She is, sir. Thank you for asking. He does not care whether she is well. He's establishing in front of 31 people and a self-inking quill that he knows who your mother is. That is the entire content of the question. And the terms of your arrangement? No difficulties? The terms of my arrangement. Say it then. Say probation. Say it in front of everyone with your kind face on. That's what you came for. None, sir. Good. Very good. Pello's hand came up and rested, briefly and heavily, on Draco's shoulder. We're all very glad to see it. Hermione was watching his face. His face did nothing. It was as level and unbothered as a sheet of ice over a well. And behind her eyes, the whole world went white. It was not thought. That was what she had not been prepared for. That a mind is not only sentences, that underneath the sentences there is a place where things are stored raw, and that a hand on a shoulder can open the door to it without any warning at all. The drawing-room floor is white marble with grey veining, and there is a Persian carpet with a burn in it from 1953, and Bella has her knee on. The door opens outward. It opens outward. It has always opened outward. And her voice. Her voice at the end. It stopped being a voice. It stopped being a... And I am by the fireplace. I am by the fireplace with my hands at my sides. I have been standing by that fireplace every night for 19 months. I never leave. I never move. That is where I live now. I live in that room. Everything else is a corridor I walk down on the way back to it. She looked at me. That's the part. That's the part I would give my magic to unmake. She looked at me, and she did not ask me for help. She had already worked out that there wasn't any. She had done the arithmetic, and I was not in it. Stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hermione's knees went. She did not fall. She reached out and caught the edge of the Hufflepuff table with one hand and made it look, to anyone watching, like a woman shifting her weight. Her ears roared. Her mouth had filled with the taste of iron. Some distant part of her registered that Pello had moved on down the line and was now asking Anthony Goldstein about his charms results. 8, 9, 10. Breathe out. He's gone. He's gone. He's 4 people away. He's asking Goldstein about charms. 11, 12. You did that well. Nobody saw. Nobody ever sees. Nobody ever sees. Hermione stood in the great hall with her hand flat on the table and her breath coming shallow, and thought with a clarity that felt like a blade sliding home. I see. I see everything. And he does not know, and I have not told him, and he has just been dragged through the worst hour of his life in front of 31 people, with his face absolutely still. And I was in the room with him. I was in the room with him, and he was alone. She was going to be sick. She got out through the side door by the trophy case and made it as far as the alcove with a suit of armor missing an arm. And she stood there with her forehead against cold stone and both hands braced flat and breathed until the roaring stopped. The library, afterwards, was the only place she could think to go. The restricted section had been reorganized after the war, badly, by people in a hurry, and the shelving system in the North Bay had never recovered. She went in at 2:00 and did not come out until Madame Pince turned the lamps down at 9. She was looking for a way to end it. She told herself this in plain declarative sentences, over and over, the way you recite something to keep it true. Cognitive resonance, reversal of, unilateral bindings, dissolution of. There was almost nothing. Cognitive magic had been abandoned in a hurry by people who had good reason to abandon it. And what remained was 3 monographs, one of them in Old Norse, and a slim, water-damaged volume by a healer named Ashworth Vane, who had worked at St. Mungo's during the First War, and had written with the dry brutality of a woman who had seen the end of this particular road. Hermione found it at 7:30 on page 91, and read it standing up. A unilateral binding is not a spell, but a wound, and like a wound, it will close if left unaggravated. Where closure is required at speed, the severance is a simple one. The healer will find the incantation appended below. It is offered with a caution. In this practitioner's experience, the difficulty is never the casting. In every case I have attended, the binding was maintained past its natural term by the receiving party, who invariably reported that they intended to sever it presently and did not. The library smelled of dust and lamp oil and the faint vanilla rot of old glue. Somewhere in the stacks, a book shifted on its shelf with a small papery sigh. Hermione read the appended incantation. It was 8 syllables. She read it 4 times until she could have said it in her sleep, and then she closed the book and did not take it to the desk and did not take out her wand. Presently, she thought. I'll do it presently. And she stood in the North Bay with her hand flat on the cover of a water-damaged book, and understood, without any possibility of pretending otherwise, that she had just become exactly the person Ashworth Vane had spent a paragraph describing. She had reasons. She lined them up. He was not sleeping, and someone ought to know. He was standing in a room in his own head every night, and someone ought to be standing there with him. If she cut the thread, he would be alone again, and no one would ever know it, because his face would go on being ice over a well until it killed him. They were good reasons. They were even true. They were not why. He was not at dinner. He was not in the charms room. She found him at 10 in the covered walkway above the west cloister, where the arcade had lost half its glass and the rain came in sideways. He was sitting on the low wall with his back to a pillar and one leg drawn up, and he had a cigarette which she had not known about, and he was not smoking it so much as letting it burn down between 2 fingers. The rain fell into the cloister garden below. There was a smell of wet box hedge and cold ash, and the mineral sharpness of stone giving up its heat. "You'll get a detention," she said. "I'll get a great many things." He did not turn. Detention is the least of the catalogue. She came and stood a little way off, out of the wet, with her arms folded. She followed me. She followed me all the way up here in this weather, and she is standing there with her arms crossed doing the thing where she waits, and I have never once in my life outlasted her at waiting. "That man," Hermione said. "Which man?" "Pello." "Ah." The cigarette burned. "A public servant. He put his hand on your shoulder." Something happened in the set of his back. It was very small. It was the stillness of an animal that has heard a sound it does not like. "He did." "You didn't move?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I had moved, I would not have stopped moving." "Because," Draco said aloud, and his voice was absolutely level, absolutely conversational. "The entire purpose of the exercise is to see whether I move. That's what the 9 of them came for. Not for the notice on the board, and not for Macmillan's handshake. They came to see whether the Malfoy boy flinches when he's touched, and they will come again in the spring, and they will keep coming until the answer stops being interesting." He turned his head at last and looked at her. The rain came sideways through the broken arcade, and the light from the single lamp caught the wet on his cheekbone, and his eyes were entirely, perfectly calm. "So, I don't flinch," he said. "It's the one thing I'm good at." Hermione stood there, 6 feet away, holding 8 syllables in her mouth that would have ended it, and 8,000 others that would have been worse. "Don't say anything kind. Please. Anything but that. I can take the rest of it. I have taken all of it for a year. But if you say something kind to me tonight, I don't know what I'll do." She crossed the 6 feet. She took the cigarette out of his fingers. He let her, his hand opening without any protest at all, the whole of him going utterly motionless. And she dropped it into a puddle where it went out with a small hiss. And then she sat down on the cold, wet wall beside him, close enough that their shoulders were not quite touching, and she looked out at the rain and said nothing whatsoever. For 11 seconds inside her head, there was no voice at all. Then, faint and unsteady, like someone speaking with their face turned away. Oh, no. December came down on the castle like a lid. The snow arrived on the 2nd and did not stop for 4 days, and by the 5th, the whole world outside the windows had been simplified to 2 colours, and the lake had begun to plate over at the edges. Inside, the corridors were a lottery. Some were warm to the point of stupefaction. Others held a dry, aching cold that lived in the flagstones and came up through the soles of your boots, and the Charms Landing, with its canvas-covered wound in the wall, was the worst of them. Flitwick moved their work to the disused observatory on the 7th floor, which had a hearth and a door that shut. 9 days became 4, Miss Granger, he said, small and precise on his stack of books. I extended you a fortnight in November. I am extending you nothing further. The demonstration is on the 11th. Yes, Professor. Mr. Malfoy. Sir. You will need to be in the same room for a considerable number of hours. I trust that presents no difficulty. None at all, sir. None whatsoever. It is the great ambition of my life, and also the thing I would run from at speed if I had anywhere to run to. None, sir, said Draco. The observatory had not been used since before the war. There was a brass orrery in the centre of it, seized up with verdigris, and a domed ceiling with a shutter that no longer opened, and a fireplace that smoked for the first hour and then settled into a low, steady heat. Dust lay over everything in a soft grey pelt. When they moved the chairs, it went up in slow spirals and turned gold where the firelight caught it. They worked. That was the surprising part, the part Hermione would think about for years afterwards, that in the middle of everything, they worked, and worked well. He had a way of finding the flaw in a construction that was almost physical, as though he could hear the note where the thing was out of true. She had the architecture and the patience and the sheer refusal to be beaten. They argued for 6 hours on the 8th of December about whether the second anchor required a spoken or an intended locus, and she won, and he conceded with a single flat. Fine. And she felt a rush of triumph, so ridiculous and so disproportionate that she had to go and look out of the window at the snow. She won that. She was right, as well, which is the insufferable part. She's smiling at the window. She thinks I can't see her smiling at the window. I have never in my life been able to not see her. By the 10th, they were close. By the 10th, they were so close that the failure of the first attempt had begun to look like a small, stupid accident, a wobble, a thing that could be fixed. They had the 17 syllables, and they had the corrected locus, and they had a construct so nearly stable that on the third attempt it held for 11 seconds. A lattice of pale light standing in the air above the seized orrery, turning slowly, shedding a fine cold radiance over the dust. Hermione let it go and sat down hard on the floor and laughed out loud. 11 seconds, she said. Malfoy, 11 seconds. He was standing on the other side of the orrery with his wand still up and his face doing absolutely nothing at all. She's laughing. She's sitting on the floor in the dust, laughing with her head back and her hand flat on the boards. And it's the real one. It's the real laugh, the one I have been thinking about since the 14th of October, like a man rationing water. I did that. I helped do that. I am going to have to leave the room. 11 seconds, he agreed, is 4 short of a pass. Oh, don't. I'm merely observing. You're pleased. She pointed at him from the floor, delighted, reckless. You are. You're standing there being pleased, and you've got the face on, and it isn't working. Not tonight. I can see straight through it. The dust turned gold in the firelight and settled. She can see through it. She can't. She can't possibly. If she could see through it, she would not be sitting on the floor smiling at me. She would be somewhere else entirely. She would have been somewhere else since October. Don't look at her. Looked, obviously, always. You've dust in your hair, he said. The 11th was the demonstration, and the weather broke against the castle that night with a violence that made the windows shake in their leads. They had gone up to the observatory at 7 to make one final run at it. At 9:30 the storm arrived, not falling snow, but driven snow, coming horizontally off the lock, and the wind found every unmended seam in the building and made a noise in them like something enormous drawing breath. The candles went sideways, the fire flattened in the grate, and the door, which had been sticking for 2 days, blew shut, and the old iron latch dropped and did not lift again. Alohomora, said Hermione. Nothing. Alohomora. It's a seized latch, not a lock, Draco said. It's not a magical problem. It's a rust problem. Then move. He moved. She spent 4 minutes on it. He spent 6. Between them they levered, unstuck, cajoled and hexed a piece of 18th century ironmongery that had been badly maintained since the reign of William IV, and at the end of it the latch was exactly where it had been, and Hermione's hair had come entirely out of its pins. "Someone will come," she said. "Someone will come at 7 tomorrow morning when the elves do the corridor. That's 9 hours. 9.5. He had gone to the fire and was feeding it methodically from the basket. "I'd sit down. You'll only wear a track in the floor." 9 hours. 9 hours in a locked room with her. This is a punishment. I don't know what for. No, that's a lie. I know exactly what for. There is a list. But this is unmistakably a punishment. Do not do anything. Do not say anything memorable. Sit at the far end and think about the syllabus. The storm went on. The fire took hold and threw a broad, unsteady light across the boards, and the brass orrery stood in the middle of it, throwing a shadow that moved like something breathing. Outside, the snow ran horizontally past the windows in the dark. They sat, at first, at a defensible distance, she with her back against the leg of the work table, he against the stone jamb of the hearth. They talked about the locus, then about Flitwick, then, somehow, about nothing at all, and Hermione discovered that Draco Malfoy, when there was no audience and no possibility of escape, and the fire was the only light, was very quietly and very dryly funny, and that when he was tired, his voice lost half its lacquer. By 11, the fire had eaten the basket down to 3 logs, and the cold had begun to come up through the floor. She had moved without noticing. That was the honest account of it. There had been a distance, and then, over the course of an hour, there had not been, and by midnight she was sitting against the same warm stone of the hearth, with perhaps a foot between them, her knees pulled up, her hands wrapped round her own elbows, shivering in small involuntary increments. She's cold. She's been cold for 20 minutes, and she hasn't said, because she never says, because saying would be an inconvenience to somebody. Coat. Give her the coat. You gave her the coat in November. Twice is a pattern. Twice is a statement. She'll look at you. Let her look. He took off his coat and put it round her shoulders, and this time he did not do it from a distance, and this time he did not pretend to be discarding it. He had to lean in to do it properly. His hands came round to draw the collar closed at her throat, and his knuckles brushed the underside of her jaw once in passing, and Hermione stopped breathing entirely. He froze. Every candle in that room went on burning, and the storm went on shrieking in the gutters, and neither of them moved a muscle, and inside her head, nothing. Silence. It was the first silence she had heard from him in 29 days. It was not a pause. It was not a held breath. It was an absolute and total whiteout. Every voice gone, the counting gone, the litany gone. The long, grinding machinery of self-surveillance simply stopped, as though someone had put a hand flat on a spinning wheel. Hermione had spent a month drowning in the noise of him. She had thought, if she had thought about it at all, that silence would be a relief. It went through her like cold water. It was the most frightening and the most tender thing that had ever happened to her. And she understood in that instant what it meant. That all of it, the counting and the songs and the endless commentary, every word of it was a machine he ran to keep from feeling anything at all, and that she had just, by existing 8 inches away from him, shut the machine off. He was not thinking. He was only there. His fingers were still at the collar of the coat. He had not withdrawn them. "Malfoy," she whispered. The sound of her voice put a single thought into the white, and it arrived slow and clear and entirely undefended, like a man talking in his sleep. "If I move an inch, I will ruin the only good thing that has ever happened to me." Neither of them moved. Then, very carefully, in the manner of a person setting down something breakable, he drew his hands back and put them in his lap and turned his face towards the fire. "You should sleep," he said. His voice had gone rough at the edge, and he did not try to correct it. "There's a hearth rug. I'll keep the fire up. I'm not tired. You've been awake since 5. How do you know that?" "Because you were in the great hall before the porridge came out, and you had a book, and you had put your hair up wrong, and I have known what time you get up since the 2nd week of September, and there is no answer to this question that I can give you." "Lucky guess," he said. She lay down on the hearthrug with his coat over her, facing the fire, with her back to him, and she was not tired at all, and she slept within 4 minutes, because it turns out that a body that has been braced for a month will let go the moment somebody sits between it and the door. She woke once, deep in the night, in that soft, blurred country where the mind is honest, because it has not yet remembered to lie. The fire had burned low and red. The storm had blown itself out, and the silence outside was the vast, padded silence of heavy snow. She was warm. Somewhere near her head there was a small sound, repeated, and it took her a long moment to understand that it was the sound of a hand moving very slowly along the edge of a coat sleeve near her shoulder without ever quite arriving. "Don't. She's asleep. She's asleep and warm and 3 inches away, and if you touch her hair while she's asleep, you are precisely the thing they all say you are. Don't. Don't." The hand stopped, withdrew. She heard him lean his head back against the stone. It was enough. Tonight was enough. Say it once, and then never again. It was enough, and I will live off it, and in the summer she will go and I will not follow her, and that is the arrangement. Go to sleep, Granger. Hermione lay absolutely still with her eyes closed and the firelight moving red across her lids, and felt something in her chest fold over and open, and knew, with the last piece of clarity available before sleep took her again, that she was no longer keeping the secret to protect him. She was keeping it because losing it meant losing this. And in the morning, when the elves came at 7 and the latch lifted, and the corridor beyond was blue with new light off the snow, she stood in the doorway with his coat still round her shoulders and turned to give it back. And he said, "Keep it, it's cold." And she said, "Thank you." And he said, "Don't make it a thing." And she thought, quite distinctly and entirely to herself, "It is a thing. It has been a thing for weeks, and one of us is going to have to say so." And in her head, from 3 feet away, a voice said, "What?" She had not spoken. She was almost certain she had not spoken. She turned that certainty over all the way down the 7th floor corridor, examining it from every side, and it held. Her mouth had been closed. Her jaw had not moved. The thought had lived entirely behind her teeth. But he had said what? And there had been nothing to say what to. Behind her, his footsteps had stopped. "Granger." "It's freezing," she said. without turning round. "I want tea before arithmancy. Granger, you'll want to change. You've got soot on your cuff." She kept walking. She went down 2 staircases and along the length of the 4th floor at a pace that was not quite a run, and the whole way she heard him behind her, not his feet. He had not followed. But the other thing, the voice, arriving flat and slow and entirely without its usual traffic. She heard that. No, don't be absurd. She didn't hear anything. She said something, and I answered it. That's the sequence. That is how conversation works. Except she didn't say anything. Except she didn't. 1, 2, 3. Something is wrong with her. Something has been wrong with her since the middle of November, and I have been so busy congratulating myself on 9 hours in a locked room that I have not once asked what. Hermione shut herself into the girls' lavatory on the 4th floor, put both hands on the edge of the basin, and looked at her own face in the spotted glass for a long time. He began to test her. She did not notice it for 2 days, because he was extraordinarily good at it. This was, after all, a boy who had been raised in a house where every dinner was an interrogation with silverware. And by the time she noticed, he had already collected enough to be certain and had simply not decided what to do about it yet. The first was at breakfast on the 13th. She was reading. He came past behind her, which he never did, and he did not stop. And as he passed, she heard, arriving with an unnatural crispness, as though it had been placed, "The salt is by your left hand." Her hand moved. It was entirely automatic. It moved before she had processed the sentence, 4 inches to the left, and closed on the salt cellar, and passed it up the table to Neville, who had not asked for it. Neville blinked. Thanks." Hermione sat with her heart hammering. Well. That could be coincidence. That is precisely the sort of thing that a mind will construct out of nothing at all. You are tired. You have not slept properly since 1997. Do it again. The second was in potions on the 14th, and he waited until Slughorn had them at opposite ends of the bench. She's about to reach for the beetle eyes, and she needs the scarab shells. Hermione's hand hesitated in mid-air over the beetle eyes. She caught it. She caught it a half-second too late, and she made herself take the beetle eyes and grind them, and she did not need them, and the potion turned the colour of dishwater, and Slughorn made a noise of gentle disappointment, and Draco said nothing at all. He did not look at her once for the rest of the lesson. His hands were perfectly steady, and underneath, running cold and quiet, and without any of the usual chaos, was a voice she had never heard from him before. Not frightened, not frantic, but methodical, the sound of a man laying instruments out on a cloth. Twice. A third would settle it. Something she could not possibly have inferred. Something with no context at all. And then what? And then you'll know. She had 4 days of it. 4 days of walking through a castle where every so often a sentence would arrive with that terrible, deliberate clarity, and she would have to force her own body not to answer. She stopped eating properly. She began to take corridors that were 3 minutes longer. She sat in arithmancy, with her fists closed under the desk, repeating multiplication tables to herself, which did precisely nothing, because the voice was not in her ears. It was under her thoughts, in the cellar of her. And there is no room in your own house you can go to in order to get away from the cellar. And the worst of it was what happened underneath the testing. Because he had begun to occlude. She felt the first wall go up on the evening of the 15th, and she had not known that such a thing could be felt from the inside. There was a sensation like a door closing very slowly in a far part of a large house, and then a whole region of him simply dimmed. The songs went first. She realized on the 16th that there had been no music in her head for a day and a half, and the absence of that idiot hair tonic jingle produced in her a grief so absurd that she had to sit down on a windowsill. Then the fantasies stopped. Then, one by one, the small living observations that had been the texture of her days. Ink on her wrist, she holds her quill wrong, she gets angrier and more polite at the same time, went out like windows in a street at closing time. What was left was terrible. What was left was the machinery, counting, and the flat administrative sentences of a man getting himself through an hour. And beneath that, unmuffled by anything, the low, continuous grinding of the thing he could not wall off, because it was not a thought, it was a room he lived in. 1, 2, 3, 4. The door opens outward. 5, 6. He was walling himself in to keep her out, and he had no idea he was doing it to her, and the only part of him he could not silence was the part that was already killing him. On the 17th, she found herself standing in the north bay of the restricted section at 8:30 in the evening, with Ashworth Vane's water-damaged monograph open at page 91, and her wand in her hand. 8 syllables. She stood there for 11 minutes. Do it. Do it now, tonight, and then tell him nothing, and he'll stop. He'll rebuild whatever it is he's taken apart, and in a week the songs will come back, and nobody will ever know. And you will never hear them. She put the wand away. She closed the book. She went back to the tower and lay in the dark with her hands over her face, and listened to a boy 4 floors below count to 300, and understood that she was no longer a person who had made a mistake. She was a person who was making a choice, hourly, and had been for a month. He came for her on the 18th. She should have expected it. She had run out of corridors by then. She had been avoiding the observatory, avoiding the Charms Landing, avoiding the covered walkway above the west cloister, and there were only so many places in a castle that a person could refuse to be. He caught her in the disused passage behind the tapestry on the 5th floor, where the stair came down from the owlery. She had chosen it precisely because nobody used it. He had, evidently, worked that out. He was leaning against the wall opposite the bottom of the stair, in the dark, with his arms folded, and he had clearly been there some time. Granger! She stopped 4 steps up. The passage smelled of dust and pigeon and cold mortar. There was one guttering torch in a bracket 20 feet along, and it did not reach him properly. He was mostly shape and voice. "You're in my way." "I am." He did not move. "I'd like to ask you something, and then I'll get out of it." "Steady. Steady. Do this properly. If you do it badly, she will lie to you, and then you will have to decide whether to believe her, and you will believe her, because you always do." "It's late," Hermione said. "It's 9:20. I have..." "Don't." Something in the flat surface of his voice cracked, briefly, and resealed. "Don't tell me you have work. You've been telling me you have work for 5 days. You have not once, in 7 years, walked away from an argument with me. and this week you have crossed a courtyard in the snow to avoid one. Her hand found the stair rail. The wood was cold and worn concave by 400 years of hands. That isn't a question. No. He straightened off the wall. The question is this. On the 12th, in the corridor outside the observatory, I said, "What?" And you flinched, and there had been nothing said. You imagined it. On the 13th, I thought about the salt, and you passed the salt to Longbottom, who does not use salt, and who has not used salt since the 3rd year, because it is one of the things I have observed in 8 years of having nothing better to do than observe people. Malfoy. On the 14th, I thought about scarab shells, and you reached for them and then made yourself take the beetle eyes instead. And you ruined a potion you have brewed correctly since you were 15 years old, and you did it deliberately. And I watched you do it. He had come to the foot of the stair. He was looking up at her, and now the torchlight caught the side of his face, and he was not composed at all, not remotely. He was white to the lips. So, here is the question, and I'd like you to consider very carefully before you answer, because I have spent 5 days constructing an explanation in which I have lost my mind, and I would honestly, at this point, prefer that one. The passage was very quiet. Please lie. Please, please lie to me. Say something clever. Say I'm ill. Say I'm imagining it. Say anything, and I will take it, and I will believe it, and we can go back to Tuesday. Because if it's true, then she has heard all of it. All of it. The counting, the songs, the drawing room, every single night of the drawing room. Her, on the 14th of October, and every day since. Everything I have ever thought about her hands. She would know. She has known. For how long? Since November. Since the casting. She has sat across a table from me for a month and let me... Oh, God. The coat. The hearthrug. She was awake. Hermione's eyes were streaming. She had not felt them start. Granger. His voice had gone very quiet and very careful, the way you speak near something that is about to fall. What did the spell do? She opened her mouth. Down the passage, the torch guttered in a draught from the owlery stair, and the shadow of the stair rail swung across the floor between them like the hand of a clock. And Hermione Granger, who had never in her life been unable to find a word, stood 4 steps above him in the dark and found that every single one of them had gone. "It bound," she said. Her voice came out wrong, thin, unsupported, a stranger's voice used badly. She heard it and hated it and made herself go on because she had run out of everything else. The casting on the 5th of November. It didn't fail. It bound, but it bound unilaterally. One anchor took and the other didn't. She was gripping the stair rail so hard that her knuckles had gone the colour of wax. It's called a unilateral binding. Ashworth Vane, 1979. It isn't a spell precisely. It's more like a wound that won't close. He had not moved. Say the rest of it. Malfoy. Say the rest of it, Granger. I hear you. The words came out of her like something being pulled. I hear your thoughts, all of them, since the night of the 5th of November, every hour, awake and asleep. I have not stopped hearing you for 43 days. The torch guttered again, 20 feet along, and steadied. Nothing happened in his face. That was the thing she would remember afterwards, the thing that stayed with her for the rest of her life. that she told Draco Malfoy the single most annihilating sentence he would ever be told, and his face did nothing at all. It did not whiten further. It did not move. He stood at the foot of the stair with his hands at his sides and looked at her with the mild attention of a man having a delivery explained to him. And behind her eyes, the world came apart. It was not words at first. It was a sound like a great sheet of ice going over, a long structural groan of something enormous, failing along its whole length. And then the words came, and they came all at once, overlapping, out of order, in fragments. 43 days. The counting she heard me, counting to 300 every night for 6 weeks. The drawing room. She was in the drawing room with me. She was... No, not that. Not that one, please. Anything but... The songs. The bloody songs. The hair tonic. Oh, that's... She knows about the card. She knows about the scarf. She knows I have a box in the bottom of my trunk with her handwriting in it, in an order that means something. The 14th of October. The freckle. Her hands. Every single... She was awake on the hearthrug. She was awake. She heard me not touch her hair, and she heard me decide not to, and she lay there. 43 days of a man begging in a locked room, and she had the key the entire time. And she came back. Every night, she kept coming back and sitting down across the table from me. Why would you do that? Why in God's name would you do that to a person? Malfoy, she said, please say something. How much? What? How much? His voice was perfectly level. Give me a proportion. All of it, or the loud parts, or only when you're near me. Be precise. You're always precise. All of it. She could barely get it out. Distance doesn't attenuate it. There's no, I can't shut it off. I've tried. I tried occlumency in November, and it doesn't work because it isn't coming from outside. It's coming from inside. It arrives where my own thoughts arrive. And you told nobody. No. You didn't go to Flitwick. No. You didn't go to Pomfrey or McGonagall or Potter or the Ministry or a healer at St. Mungo's or any one of the 11 adults in this building whose entire function is precisely this. No. Why not? The passage smelled of pigeon and cold mortar and the burnt fat smell of a cheap torch. Somewhere above them, in the owlery, a bird resettled itself with a dry rattle of feathers. Because they'd have made me stop, said Hermione. She had not known she was going to say it. It came up out of her whole and terrible, and she stood there in the aftermath of it, with her mouth still open, and she watched. She actually watched the last shred of colour leave his face. There it is. There it is, then. You found a severance, he said. Yes. When? The 29th of November. Her voice broke on it. The day the Ministry came. Ashworth Vane, page 91, 8 syllables. I know it by heart. I have known it by heart for 19 days. 19 days. Malfoy. You have had the means to get out of my head in your possession for 19 days. He said it slowly, as if translating it. And on the 11th of December, you sat down on a hearthrug in a locked room and let me put my coat around you. That is not. And on the morning of the 12th, you stood in the doorway with it still round your shoulders and thought, what was it? That it had been a thing for weeks, and one of you would have to say so. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the most horrifying thing she had ever seen on a human face. I did wonder what I'd answered. Thank you for clearing that up. Draco, don't. The word came out with the first real force he had used, and it stopped her dead. Don't say my name. Don't you dare say my name in that voice. Not now. Not with the whole of it lying on the floor between us. 19 days. She had the key for 19 days, and she chose to stay. And the appalling thing, the truly obscene thing, the thing that ought to have you certified, is what that does to you. Because some starving animal at the back of your skull has just heard she chose to stay and is trying to make it mean something. It's standing up in there, wagging its tail. Look at it. Look at what you've become. She kept you because it was interesting. No, she kept you because she was sorry for you. Which is worse. That is so much worse. Hermione came down 2 steps. That isn't why, she said. That is not why, and you know it isn't, because you have been in a room with me every day for 6 weeks. I have been in a room with you every day for 6 weeks, he agreed, with my skull open. Stop it. You've had a very complete education, Granger. You know what time I stop counting and what time I start again. You know what I do at 3 in the morning. You know that when Pello put his hand on my shoulder, I was not, in point of fact, in the great hall at all. His voice did not rise. It never rose. It went thinner and flatter and more precise, like something being drawn out into wire. You know exactly what I saw, and exactly where I was standing, and exactly what I did about it, which was nothing, for the full duration. You had that, from me, without asking. I know. And each night you went back to your tower, and you decided, deliberately as a matter of policy, to have it again the next day. I know. Then we are agreed on the facts. It isn't a matter of policy. She was down another step, and another. She was on the floor of the passage now, 4 feet from him, and her hands were shaking so badly she folded them into her sleeves. You want me to say I did it out of curiosity, or pity? Say either of those, and I'll tell you what it actually was, because I have had 43 days to work it out, and I got there in November, and I have been lying to myself about it ever since. Don't. I didn't cast it because I was afraid of what would happen to you if nobody was listening. That is a good reason, and it is true, and it is not the reason. Don't say it. The reason is that on the night of the 11th, you put your hands on the collar of that coat, and every single thought in your head stopped, and I have never in my life been so. Don't say it. So frightened, and so... Draco, there was nothing. There was nothing in you at all. For 11 seconds you were not running. You were just there. And I have thought about those 11 seconds every hour since... He moved. He crossed the 4 feet between them so fast that she took a step back into the newel post, and he stopped an inch short and did not touch her and put his hand flat on the wood beside her head instead, and stood there, breathing like a man who had run up all 7 floors. Inside her head there was one word, repeating at enormous volume, with nothing behind it and nothing in front of it. Please, 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 please. She could not have said, then or ever, what he was asking for. They stood like that, his hand on the newel post, her back against it. 400 years of worn oak and 1 inch of freezing air, and the torch failing at the far end of the passage, and a bird shifting overhead. Then he stepped back. No, he said. Draco. No. He was straightening his cuff. He was actually straightening his cuff. His hands were doing it without any instruction, turning the fold of the fabric over, aligning the silver link. And she watched a boy assemble himself back into a man in front of her in the space of 4 seconds. You don't get to have that as well. Have what? This. His voice had gone back to its ordinary temperature, and that was how she knew he had reached the bottom of something. Whatever this is, the rest of it. You've had everything else of mine without asking, and you're not having the last piece, because I have precisely one thing left that is mine, Granger, and it is the right to decide what I say out loud. That is not fair. It is exactly fair. It is the only fair thing in this passage. I never asked for it. It happened to me. For 4 days. He said it very quietly. It happened to you for 4 days, and then you found a way out, and then it stopped happening to you and started being something you did. The torch guttered and went out. They stood in the dark. Hermione could hear him breathing. She could hear, in the other place, the sound of a man methodically closing doors along a corridor, one after another, and it was the loneliest sound she had ever encountered. "Cast it," he said. "Draco, cast the severance. Tonight. And then don't—" For a fraction of a second, something failed in his voice. He mended it. "And then we'll finish the project, because I'm not letting you fail a demonstration over me. And after that, you'll go and do whatever enormous thing you're going to do with your life, and this will have been a thing that happened in a castle. Please, don't do this. I'm not doing anything. That's rather the point. For the first time in 6 weeks, I'm not doing anything at all." And he walked past her. She heard him go, the hollow, flat sound of footsteps down a stone passage, unhurried, absolutely even. And she stood in the dark with her hands over her mouth and inside her head, from further and further away, growing quieter with every step, and never once stopping. She heard, "Go back, go back, go back, go back, turn round, tell her, say one true thing in your entire life." 14 steps, and she'll be gone. 13, 12, 11. She's crying. You can hear her. 10, 9. This is the moment. This is the one they write about. This is the only one you get. 8, 7, 6. Coward. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the door at the end of the passage opened and closed, and he kept walking, and she heard every single step of it from the inside. She did not cast it that night. She meant to. She went up to the tower with her wand already in her hand, and the 8 syllables sitting on her tongue like coins. And she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark with her boots still on, and she opened her mouth, and from 4 floors below there came 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't think about her face on the stairs. 5, 6, 7, 8. You had one thing to do. 14 steps. That was the whole task. 9, 10. She sat there until 3:30 with her wand across her knees and cast nothing, and hated herself with a purity she had not previously known she was capable of. The demonstration was on the 20th. They had 2 days, and they spent them in the observatory, and it was the most terrible working she had ever done. He was perfectly civil. That was the instrument he chose, and he wielded it like a surgeon. He said, "Good morning." He passed her the ink. He conceded 3 points of theory that he could have fought her on, and each concession landed like a door being shut in a corridor she was not permitted to enter. He did not once look at her for longer than the exchange required. When their hands were both on the work table, he moved his, not quickly, not pointedly, simply moved it 4 inches, the way you shift a book that is in the wrong place. And inside, there was almost nothing. He had built the walls in earnest now. Where there had been weather and traffic and songs and the whole racketing chaos of him, there was a grey administrative quiet. Second locus, third measure, she'll want the anchor spoken, agree with her, get through the hour. Occasionally the machinery slipped and something came through, and it was always the same thing, and it was always brief. Her hair's down today. Stop. Once, on the 19th, when she reached past him for the brass calipers and her sleeve brushed his forearm, the entire grey structure went white for a half-second, and she heard, before it sealed over, 1 syllable. Please. She had to go and stand at the window. The demonstration held for 51 seconds. The lattice stood above the seized orrery in the cold blue light of a December morning, turning slowly, absolutely stable, shedding a fine radiance over the dust and over Flitwick's small delighted face, and over the two of them standing 6 feet apart with their wands up and their eyes on the construct and not on each other. It was, Flitwick said afterwards, the finest piece of paired cognitive work he had seen at NEWT level in 30 years, and he said a great deal more that Hermione did not hear. When it was over, Draco lowered his wand and said, "Well done, Granger," in a voice with nothing whatsoever in it, and put on his coat and left. She cast the severance on the 22nd at 11 o'clock at night, standing in the middle of the observatory with the fire unlit and the frost making ferns on the inside of the glass. It took her 40 minutes to get to it. She kept finding things to do first. She wound the orrery, which did not wind. She swept the hearth. She stood at the window and looked at the black lake with its plating of pale ice, and listened to a boy in a dungeon dormitory tell himself, with the dreadful patience of a man who has done it every night for 3 years, that he was not in a drawing-room in Wiltshire, that the room he was in had a stone ceiling and 4 beds and a window at the west end, that the door opened inward, that it was the 22nd of December. Inward. It opens inward. Say it again. Inward. Hermione raised her wand. "I'm sorry," she said out loud to an empty room. "I'm so sorry. I should have done this in November." She said the 8 syllables. There was no sound. There was no light. There was a sensation, very brief, like a thread drawn out of cloth, a small clean pull somewhere behind her sternum, and then nothing. Nothing. She stood in the observatory in the dark and heard the frost tick on the glass and the fire irons settling, and her own breath and her own heart, and no one else at all. It was the most complete silence she had ever experienced. She had lived 47 days with another person's mind in her head, and she had complained about it, and she had lost sleep over it, and she had thought of it as an affliction. And now that it was gone, she stood in an empty tower room and put her hand flat against the cold stone of the wall and discovered that she was standing in a house where somebody had died. She sat down on the hearthrug where she had slept and put her forehead on her knees and did not get up for a very long time. The Christmas holidays took nearly everyone away. Hermione stayed. She told McGonagall it was for the library, It was not for the library. The castle in the last week of December was a vast, cold cathedral of a place, echoing, mostly empty, with snow banked to the sills on the north side, and the corridors so quiet that a footstep 2 floors away was a public event. There were 9 students left. Draco Malfoy was one of them, because there was nowhere else, because the house was a mausoleum with his mother rattling about in it. And she knew that, and knowing it now felt like theft in a way that it never had when he was saying it to her directly. That was the discovery of those 10 days, and it was worse than anything that had come before. She had to learn him from the outside. She had never done it, not properly. For 6 weeks she had had the answers printed on the inside of her eyelids, and now she had what everyone else in the world had, which was a young man with a face like a closed drawer, and it was unbearable. She saw him at breakfast on the 24th, and he inclined his head half an inch, and she had absolutely no idea what that meant. None. It could have meant anything. It could have meant nothing. She saw him on the 26th in the covered walkway, standing where he had stood in November, not smoking a cigarette, and she came within 12 feet of him and stopped, and he turned and looked at her, and his face was calm and courteous and entirely opaque, and she thought, "I do not know if you want me to come closer or if you want me to leave," and the not knowing was a physical pain in her chest, low and grinding. She left. She lay awake that night raging at herself. This is what everyone has. This is the ordinary human condition. Every person on this earth walks around unable to hear anybody, and they manage perfectly well. They ask, they guess, they risk it. And you can't, because you had the answers handed to you, and now you don't know how to want something without being certain of it first. She saw him on the 28th on the stairs, and he stood aside to let her pass, which he had done since October, and she got to the landing before she realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. The note came on the 30th. She found it at breakfast, folded once, sitting on her plate in the great hollow half-lit emptiness of the hall, and she knew the hand before she touched it. Narrow, upright, immaculate, the letters made with a slight backward lean like someone standing very straight. It said, "Observatory, 9 o'clock, bring nothing." She read it 11 times. She turned it over. There was nothing on the back. She had, in her former life, an entire instrument for interpreting a thing like this. Now she had 6 words and a piece of paper, and she sat in an empty great hall with her hands flat on the table on either side of it, and understood that she was going to have to walk up 7 flights of stairs at 9 o'clock at night with absolutely no idea what was waiting at the top, and that this, precisely this, was what everybody else called courage, and that she had been quietly exempt from it for 6 weeks. He had lit the fire. That was the first thing. The observatory was warm. The fire had clearly been going for hours, and the dust had been swept, and the brass orrery had been cleaned. Someone had spent a great deal of time on it with oil and a cloth, and the verdigris was gone from the armatures, and the whole thing stood in the firelight burning gold. The second thing was that there was a book on the work table. Not a book. A ledger, plain, black, the sort of thing kept in a stationer's back room for accounts, and it was closed, and his hand was flat on the top of it. He was standing behind the table, He had not sat down. He looked as though he had been standing there for some time. Malfoy. Granger. He cleared his throat, which she had never heard him do. You cast it. The severance. On the 22nd. Yes. Something moved through him, and she could not read it, and the not reading was agony. I thought so. There was I don't know how to describe it. On the 22nd, at about 11, I was standing at the window, and something went quiet that I hadn't known was making a noise. Hermione came further into the room. I should have cast it in November, she said. I have no defense. I want to say that before anything else, because I have been trying for 8 days to construct one, and there isn't one. What I did to you was a theft. It doesn't matter that I didn't start it. I sustained it, and I sustained it because I wanted to, and you were right on the stairs about all of it, including the part where I would rather you had said something crueler. He was quiet for a moment. You'll want to sit down, he said. Why? Because I have been rehearsing this for 8 days, and it is catastrophically embarrassing, and I find I would prefer you at a lower elevation. She sat. He took his hand off the ledger. On the night of the 22nd, he said, I didn't sleep, which is not remarkable. What was remarkable was that at about 1 in the morning, I caught myself explaining something to you. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire, and his hands had gone into his pockets, and she saw the left one trembling before he hid it. Not aloud, in my head. The way I have apparently been doing since approximately the 4th of October, without noticing, because a man alone in his skull does not notice who he is talking to. Draco? And I stopped, he went on, because I realized that for the first time in 6 weeks there was no one on the other end of it. The fire popped. A log settled. I found, he said, that I could not bear that. Hermione's hands closed on the edge of the chair. So, I got up, said Draco Malfoy, and I found a ledger in the cupboard where they keep the astronomy stores, and I sat down at 3 in the morning on the 23rd of December, and I wrote down every single thing I had thought at you that day. He pushed the ledger across the table. And then I did it again on the 24th, he said, and the 25th, and I have done it every night since, because it turns out the only thing worse than you hearing everything I think is you hearing nothing at all, and I have gone 8 days now knowing you can't, and it is the loudest silence I have ever stood in. She looked at the ledger. She did not touch it. How much of it is in there? All of it. His jaw set. The counting. The songs. There's a page on the 26th that is simply the words to a hair tonic advertisement, 41 times, and I would ask you to skip it, but I know you won't. The drawing room. What I did and did not do, in order with the times. There is a passage about your hands that I wrote at 4 in the morning on the 28th and immediately tried to burn, and the fire was out, and by the time I'd got it lit, I'd decided that burning it would be exactly the same cowardice as the 14 steps in that corridor, so it's still in there, on page 60. Hermione's eyes were streaming, and she did not lift a hand to stop it. Why? She said. Because you took it, he said, and I have decided to give it. He came round the table. He stopped a yard away. That was the entire objection, Granger. Not that you knew. God help me, the knowing was never the... He stopped and breathed, and started again with the wire drawn thinner. The objection was that I never got to hand it to you. So, here, I am handing it to you. It is the only thing I own that is worth anything, and you may read every word of it. And when you have, you will know exactly what I am. And then you will do whatever you are going to do, and I will survive it. Hermione stood up. She put her hand on the ledger and did not open it, and looked up at him with her face wet and her heart going like something trying to get out. "I don't want to read it," she said. Everything in him went absolutely still. "I want you to say it," said Hermione Granger, "out loud, to my face, with your mouth. And I know exactly what I'm asking for, and I know it's the single hardest thing in the world for you. And I'm asking anyway, because I have heard you think it 400 times, and not one of those times was yours to give. And this one would be." He did not speak. The fire moved in the grate, and the polished orrery threw its slow brass shadow across the floorboards, and Draco Malfoy stood a yard away from her with his hands at his sides and said nothing at all. And Hermione understood that she was watching a man attempt something that no one had ever taught him how to do. She waited. She had waited before, in doorways and at benches and in the cold observatory dust, and she had always had the other thing to fall back on: the running commentary, the counting, the endless, helpful traffic of his interior. Now there was nothing. There was a fire and a silence and a face that gave her not one single clue, and she made herself stand in it without asking for a rescue. "I can't," he said. "Yes, you can. I have tried." His voice had gone very low. "For 8 days, I have written 400 pages at you, and I have stood in front of a mirror like an idiot. You may put that in your ledger of things to be ashamed of. I stood in front of a mirror, and every time I get to the actual sentence, there is nothing there. The mechanism doesn't exist. Nobody ever built it in me. I can think it at a wall for 6 weeks, and I cannot get 4 words past my own teeth." "Then say something else." "What?" "Anything." She was crying, and she did not care. "Say any true thing. Start anywhere. Doesn't have to be the sentence." He looked at her for a long moment. "You have ink on the inside of your wrist," he said. Hermione's breath went out of her. "You always have. You hold your quill wrong. You've held it wrong since you were 11. You grip it too near the nib, and the side of your hand drags through the wet. And there is not one person in this castle who has ever told you, and I have known it for 8 years, and I never said a word, because if I told you, you would fix it in an afternoon, and I did not want it fixed. I wanted it there. That is the sort of thing I am. That is page 11. Draco. You have a freckle under your left eye, and I noticed it on the 4th of October, and I have thought about it every day since, which is 400 and... No, don't check the arithmetic. You'll check the arithmetic." He took a breath, and his hands had come out of his pockets and had nowhere to go. When you argue with a professor, you become angrier and more polite at exactly the same rate, and it is the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched a human being do. And I have arranged my seat in 3 separate classrooms in order to have a better view of it. Stop. When you laugh properly, you put your hand flat on the table, not the polite one, the other one. You have done it 4 times in my presence since September, and I could tell you the date of each of them. I have never once made you do it, and it is the single greatest ambition of my life, which I am aware is a pitiful thing for a man to admit in a room with a fire in it. He was not looking at the floor anymore. He was looking straight at her, and his face, for the first time in the entire calendar of the year, had come apart. And it was not a beautiful thing. It was raw and frightened and entirely unarmored. I kept a card with brewing temperatures on it because you wrote it. I took your scarf out of the library on the 12th of October, and I have it in the bottom of my trunk. And there is no version of that which is not the act of a lunatic. There is a box under it with every scrap of parchment you have ever corrected in your handwriting, in an order, and I could not tell you what the order means. And I stood by a fireplace in my own house, while you... He stopped. The word did not come. She watched him try to make it come, watched his throat work, watched the tremor in his left hand go through the whole of him. I stood there, he said, and I did nothing. And I have stood there every night since, and I will be standing there when I am 60. And if there is any part of you that came up 7 flights of stairs tonight, hoping that I would turn out to be someone else, Granger, I am not. That's the ledger. That's all of it. That is the entire contents. The room was very warm and very quiet. Hermione crossed the yard between them. She did it slowly, so that he could stop her, and he did not stop her. And when she was close enough, she took his left hand, the one with the tremor, out of the air where it had been suspended uselessly, and turned it over, and pressed her palm flat against his palm, and closed her fingers. He shut his eyes. "Now say the sentence," she said. "Granger." "I have had the whole ledger for 6 weeks. You've just given me half of it out loud, and it nearly killed you, and I am so proud of you I can barely stand up." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "One more. 4 words. You said 4. Give me the 4. His hand had closed on hers so hard it hurt. She let it. "I love you," said Draco Malfoy. The fire popped. Somewhere far below in the sleeping castle, a clock began to strike the half-hour. "There," he said unevenly. "That's... well, there it is. It's been there since approximately the 4th of October, and I have been carrying it about like a man with a broken rib, pretending he isn't limping. And I would like it on the record that saying it aloud is significantly worse than any of the..." She kissed him. She did it because he was still talking, and because she had spent 47 days inside a mind that could not stop talking, and because she had learned in a locked observatory in the middle of a storm that the only thing on this earth capable of shutting it off was her being close enough to touch. He made a sound against her mouth, a small broken sound, entirely unguarded, the first completely honest noise she had ever heard him make. And then his free hand came up and found the side of her face, careful, unbelieving, the way a man touches something he has been told is not real. And she kissed him in the firelight, with the frost ticking on the windows and the brass orrery turning gold. And she thought, distinctly and deliberately, at nobody at all. "I can't hear you. I can't hear a single thing, and I have never in my life been so certain of anything." When they broke apart, he did not go far. He stood with his forehead against hers, and his hands still cupped along her jaw, breathing like a man who has come up from deep water. "Say something," she whispered. "I have no idea what's happening." "I know. That is, Granger, I want to be very clear. That is a statement of fact. I had a plan for tonight. There was a plan. The plan concluded with you taking the ledger and leaving, and me sitting down on that hearthrug and not getting up until the term started. That was a terrible plan. It was a magnificent plan. It was structurally sound. It had contingencies." His voice was shaking. He let it. "None of the contingencies covered this." She laughed. The real one. The one with her hand coming up flat against his chest instead of a table. And she felt it go through him like a struck bell. And she felt his arms come round her properly for the first time, and heard him say, quite quietly, into her hair, "Oh, what?" "Nothing. Nothing at all. Only I have been trying to get you to do that since September, and I would like to note that it took me 4 months and a complete personal collapse." They stayed in the observatory until the fire went down. They did not talk about the ledger, which lay closed on the work table and stayed closed. At some point, she asked him what the hair tonic song was, and he refused, absolutely and on principle. And she sang the 4 bars she had heard 400 times, badly, and he put both hands over his face and said, "I am going to walk into the lake." And she said, "You always say that." And he said, "Yes, well, you always hear it." And there was one dreadful half-second where the joke might have gone wrong, and it did not, because he laughed. She had never heard him laugh. Not properly, not once, not in 8 years. It was a rough, unpracticed sound, like something taken out of a cupboard after a long time, and Hermione sat on the hearthrug in an unused tower room on the 30th of December, and thought that she would spend a considerable portion of her life engineering the circumstances for it. At 2 in the morning, with the last of the coals going pink and grey, she said the thing she had been carrying since the passage behind the tapestry. "I want to tell you what it was like. You don't have to. I do." She had her back against his shoulder and his coat over both of them, which had by now stopped being a thing and become simply the arrangement. "Because you think I sat there for 6 weeks watching you like an exhibit, and that is not what happened, and I need you to have the accurate version." He was quiet. "Go on." For the first 4 days, I was terrified. Then for about a week, it was the most bewildering thing that has ever happened to me, because I had spent 7 years thinking I knew what was inside you, and it turned out I had it entirely and comprehensively wrong. I thought you were cold. She turned her head. "You are the least cold person I have ever encountered. You are a house on fire with the shutters bolted. That's not." And then, somewhere in the middle of November, it stopped being about you at all and started being about me. And that's the part I'm ashamed of, and I'll be ashamed of it for years. Because I found out that I was the only person alive who knew that a boy in this castle stands by a fireplace every night at 2 in the morning, and instead of getting him help, I kept it. Her voice went thin. Not to spy, to be the one who knew, and that is a small, greedy, dishonest thing, and I did it for 19 days with the cure in my pocket. The fire ticked. "Yes," said Draco. "Well, I did wonder whether you were going to say the true version or the flattering one." "Which did I say?" "The true one. You always do. eventually. It's the most exhausting thing about you." His hand had found hers again, in the dark, under the coat. "For what it's worth, and I have thought about very little else for 8 days, I would not undo it." "Draco, I mean that. I'd have gone the rest of my life with the shutters bolted, Granger. I was going to. That was the entire plan for the next 60 years, and I had costed it out." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "You broke into a locked house. I am not going to pretend it wasn't a break-in, but I would have died in there." Term began on the 9th of January, and the castle filled up, and the corridors turned loud again. Nothing was announced. There was no announcement to make. They were not the sort of people who made them. What happened instead was that Hermione Granger began sitting at a particular end of a particular bench in potions, and Draco Malfoy began coming into the library at 7:30, and by the second week of February, approximately, everyone had worked it out, and only Ron Weasley said anything. And what he said, after a long and visibly effortful silence, was, "If he's decent to you, I won't say a word. If he isn't, I'll say several." He was decent to her. Not smoothly. Not always. There were weeks in February when the walls went up out of pure habit, and she had to stand outside them and knock out loud with words like everybody else in the world. And that was the work of it, and she did it. And slowly he stopped needing to be knocked for. He still did not sleep well. That did not resolve. Some things do not. But in March she found him at 4 in the morning in the observatory with a ledger open and a fresh page, writing. And she sat down beside him and said, "Say it to me instead." And he did, haltingly for 2 hours, about a drawing-room floor with grey veining and a door that opened outward. And when it was finished, the sky over the loch had gone the colour of a pearl, and he had not once been alone in that room. He slept the whole of the following night. She counted it as the greatest achievement of her academic career. The demonstration lattice, theirs, the 51-second one, was written up by Flitwick and published in the spring. Jointly, both names, alphabetical, so that it read Granger and Malfoy, and he pretended for a full week that this was a personal humiliation. They took their NEWTS in June, and the results came in July. And by then there was a flat in London with too many books and a table that was always covered in them. And on a Sunday in August, with the windows open and the noise of the street coming up, and no rain at all, Hermione looked up from her reading to find him watching her across the table, with the newspaper unread in his hands, and an expression on his face that he no longer bothered to hide. "What?" she said. "Nothing. Malfoy. It's genuinely nothing." He put the paper down. "I was only thinking that this is exactly it. This is the whole of it. A table and too many books, and neither of us saying anything for an hour." Hermione put her hand flat on the table. "I know," she said. "You told me. Page 17. And he laughed, the rough, unpracticed sound, easier now, worn in, and reached across the books and took her hand, and did not let go of it, and did not need to be heard to be known.
So that's the end. Thank you for staying with me. 9 parts is a long time, I know that. I want to tell you one thing I thought about while I wrote this. There is a scene in part 5. They are locked in a tower room. There is a storm. He puts his coat around her shoulders. His hands touched her jaw, just for a second, and his mind goes completely silent. That was the first scene I wrote. Everything else came after it, because that was my whole idea. All that noise in his head are counting, the songs, the painting, it was never really noise. It was a wall. He built it so he would not have to feel anything, and then one person stood close to him, and the wall stopped walking. I also thought a lot about Hermione. She is not the good one here. She had the curl. She kept it for 19 days. She knew it was wrong. She did it anyway. I did not want to punish her for that. I wanted to understand her because I think many of us do this. We want to know everything about someone. We read their messages, we watch them from far away, we collect small pieces of them, and we call it love. But it's not love yet. It becomes love when you stop talking and you start giving. That is why we had to say it out loud, in the last part, with his own mouth. Even thought it was hard, even thought he was afraid. She heard him sing it 400 times. It meant nothing. He said it once, and it meant everything. So here is what I want to say to you. If there is something true in you, say it out loud to their face. Nobody can hear your thoughts. That is the whole point. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.